Over the next few days, Richard acted swiftly. He changed the locks on their doors, installed a comprehensive surveillance system, and contacted a lawyer to fast-track a restraining order. He wasn't willing to leave any stone unturned. Each night, he checked the locks on the windows and activated the alarm system before finally allowing himself a moment of rest. But Richard understood that it wasn't just their physical safety he needed to protect. Lauren's emotional well-being was equally fragile. The recent events had stirred old fears within her, fears she had just begun to overcome. Her usual exuberance and playful spirit had dimmed, replaced by quiet uncertainty. One evening, after a dinner marked by an unusual silence, Richard decided he could no longer avoid addressing the issue. Lauren sat curled up on the couch with a book, but her distant expression made it clear her thoughts were elsewhere. "Hey, Lauren," he said gently, sitting beside her. "Do you want to talk about what's been bothering you?" Lauren looked up, her large eyes filled with hesitation. She closed her book and leaned into Richard, seeking the comfort of his presence. "Is he really gone, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is he going to come back?" Richard wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "He's gone, sweetheart," he reassured her firmly. "And I'm doing everything I can to make sure he never comes near us again. You're safe here, I promise." Lauren nodded, but the fear in her gaze lingered. She whispered, "I'm scared. What if he tries to take me away?" The thought ignited a protective anger within Richard, but he kept his tone steady and calm. "That's not going to happen," he said resolutely. "I won't let him, and neither will your mom. We'll always protect you, no matter what." Rose, who had been quietly observing from the kitchen, joined them on the couch. She wrapped her arms around them both, her voice gentle yet unwavering. "We're in this together," she said. "We're a family, and no one is going to take that away from us." Richard nodded, his voice steady. "Nobody's going to take you away from us, Lauren." Lauren glanced between them, her gaze searching their faces. The unwavering determination she found there seemed to ease her fears. Slowly, she leaned into them, her small body relaxing. "Okay," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I trust you." They sat huddled together, drawing strength from one another in the quiet of the evening. Richard felt a fierce protectiveness rise within him, an unshakable commitment to his family's safety. They were his world, and he would stop at nothing to keep them safe. The following morning, Richard took additional steps to safeguard their lives. His lawyer promised to expedite the restraining order, another layer of protection against the looming threat. He also arranged for both Rose and Lauren to have a panic button app installed on their phones, providing immediate access to law enforcement if needed. Though it wasn't a perfect solution, these measures brought a small degree of comfort to the family. The heavy weight of anxiety that had hung over them like a storm cloud began to lift, bit by bit. As the days stretched into weeks, Richard noticed a glimmer of hope returning to Lauren's eyes. The laughter that had once filled their home began to echo faintly once more. They were far from completely safe, but they were together, and that, above all else, was what mattered most. The tension in their lives began to ebb away. The man who had once threatened their peace hadn't returned, and the precautions Richard had implemented seemed to be doing their job. Slowly, Lauren began to regain her confidence. The shadows of fear that had clouded her bright spirit started to lift, and her laughter, tentative at first, became more frequent. Little by little, she felt at ease in her world once more. One quiet evening, after tucking Lauren into bed, Richard and Rose found themselves on the balcony of their Washington, D.C. apartment. The city lights glittered in the distance, reflecting the quiet hum of life below. The air was cool and crisp, hinting at the changing season, a quiet promise of renewal. "I think she's finally starting to feel safe again," Rose said softly, her hand resting lightly on Richard's knee. Her voice carried a blend of relief and gratitude. "You've done so much to protect us, Richard. I don't even know how to thank you." Richard shook his head, his gaze lingering on the distant skyline. "You don't need to thank me, Rose. I'm just doing what I should, what any father would." Rose leaned her head against his shoulder, a faint smile gracing her lips. Not every father would go this far, she replied. You've given her something she's never had before, a sense of security. And you've given me something I thought I'd lost. Hope. Richard turned to meet her eyes, his heart swelling with emotion. We've given each other hope, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. I found something with you and Lauren that I never thought I'd have: a family, a reason to fight for something beyond myself, and nothing is going to take that away from us. They sat there in the soft glow of the city lights, the enormity of their journey settling over them. The path they had walked together had been fraught with challenges, and there were likely more ahead. Yet in that moment, they allowed themselves to acknowledge how far they had come. They had confronted their fears head-on and emerged stronger for it, bound together as a family. As the evening deepened, they quietly returned inside, shutting the balcony door behind them. The apartment felt warm and inviting, a sanctuary in an uncertain world. Richard moved through the home, methodically checking the locks less out of necessity and more from habit before joining Rose in their bedroom. Lying beside her, he listened to the gentle rhythm of the city beyond and the steady, peaceful breaths of the two people he held dearest. A wave of calm washed over him, quieting the doubts and anxieties that had lingered for so long. They were safe. They were together. And in that moment, Richard knew that was everything. Whatever challenges the future might hold, he was confident they would face them as a family. That certainty gave him the strength to let go of the burdens he had carried for so long. They had endured the darkness, and now, together, they were stepping into the light. In that light, they would build something beautiful, a life filled with love, safety, and the unbreakable ties of a family that had fought to stay whole. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new normal for Richard, Rose, and Lauren. The pervasive fear that had once gripped their lives started to dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. The man who had disrupted their peace seemed to have vanished, and with each passing day, their belief grew stronger that he would not return. Yet, the absence of danger was only the first step. The deeper challenge lay in repairing the bonds that had been strained and tested by the ordeal. The confrontation had deeply shaken Lauren, leaving its mark on her tender spirit. Slowly, however, she was rediscovering her vibrant, joyful self. The nightmares that had haunted her were fading, and her laughter, like a balm, began to fill their home again. It was a sound that brought warmth and optimism to Richard and Rose. Though they noticed Lauren's progress, Richard and Rose knew there was still work to be done. Her young world had been upended more than once, and it would take time for her to fully believe in the stability they were determined to create. One crisp Saturday morning, Richard decided it was time to do something special for both Rose and Lauren. He wanted to strengthen the growing sense of family they had been carefully rebuilding. Rising early, he prepared breakfast and proposed an idea that sparked instant excitement. "There's a park I used to visit all the time as a kid," Richard said as the family gathered at the kitchen table, the aroma of freshly made pancakes and warm syrup filling the air. "It's got big open spaces, a beautiful lake, and plenty of trails to explore." He looked at Lauren with a smile. "I thought we could pack a picnic and spend the day there, just the three of us." Lauren's eyes lit up, her face beaming with excitement. "Can we bring a kite?" "I've never flown one before," she exclaimed. Richard chuckled, his heart swelling at her enthusiasm. "Of course we can. We'll pick one up on the way," he promised. Rose reached over, placing her hand gently over Richard's. "That sounds perfect, Richard. We all need this a day to just enjoy each other," she said with a grateful smile. The rest of the morning was spent preparing for their outing. They filled a picnic basket with sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a few indulgent treats. As they worked together, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. The oppressive weight that had lingered for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a long overdue lightness. The drive to the park was filled with laughter and cheerful chatter. Lauren, perched in the back seat, eagerly rattled off her plans for the day. She spoke of flying the kite, exploring the trails, and perhaps even dipping her toes into the lake if the water wasn't too cold. Richard listened, a soft smile playing on his lips. Occasionally he glanced at Rose, who was watching Lauren with a look of quiet contentment. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, everything seemed to align. The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but in that moment, it felt like they were on the right path. Together they were beginning to reclaim the peace and happiness they had fought so hard to achieve. Life finally felt like it was falling into place. This was more than just a return to normal, it felt profoundly right. When they reached the park, Richard was struck by how much it looked as he remembered. The towering trees still lined the paths, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The lake shimmered under the sunlight, its surface calm and inviting. And the vast open fields seemed to beckon them for running, playing, and of course flying a kite. They chose a quiet spot near the lake and spread out their picnic blanket. Lauren could barely contain her excitement as she unpacked the brightly colored kite they had picked up along the way. Its long, fluttering tails danced in the breeze as Richard showed her how to prepare it. "All right, Lauren," Richard said with a warm smile. "Here's how it works." He held the kite firmly while Lauren positioned herself a few feet away, gripping the string tightly. "You're going to run as fast as you can. When I say so, let go of the kite but keep running. The wind will do the rest." Lauren's face turned serious with focus. "I'm ready," she declared. "Okay," Richard said, a spark of anticipation lighting his face. "Go." Lauren bolted forward, her small legs pumping as quickly as they could. Richard released the kite, and it soared upward, its colorful tail swirling behind it. Lauren glanced back, her eyes wide with delight and her smile radiant as the kite climbed higher into the sky. "It's flying, Dad." "It's really flying," she shouted, her voice brimming with pure joy. Richard jogged toward her, his laughter echoing as he watched Lauren expertly hold the kite string. Rose joined them, her clapping and cheering matching Lauren's enthusiasm. For her first attempt, Lauren handled the kite with surprising ease, keeping it steady as it floated against the backdrop of the clear blue sky. They spent the entire afternoon soaking in the simple pleasures of the park. They played games, wandered the serene trails, and even dipped their toes into the cool lake water as they walked along its edge. Conversations flowed easily about everything, and nothing and the hours slipped by unnoticed. For Richard, this was more than just a pleasant day. It was one of the most significant moments he could recall, filled with a rare and genuine peace. As the sun began its slow descent, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, they returned to their picnic spot. Lauren leaned against Richard, her head nestled on his shoulder. Rose sat beside them, her hand wrapped around Richard's, her expression content and tender. "This was the best day ever," Lauren murmured, her voice thick with drowsiness as her eyelids fluttered closed. Richard pressed a gentle kiss on her hair, his heart brimming with gratitude. "I'm so glad you had fun, sweetheart." Rose watched the scene, her heart swelling with love for the two most important people in her life. "We should make this a tradition," she said softly, the idea carrying a warmth that made Richard nod in agreement. He realized at that moment that they had stepped into a new chapter. The shadow of fear and uncertainty that had once darkened their days was fading, replaced by hope, happiness, and the quiet joy of building a life together. This was more than a day at the park. It was a beginning. As they packed their belongings and made their way back to the car, Lauren's kite fluttered gently behind Richard. He felt a sensation that had been foreign to him for far too long, an undeniable sense of peace. The weight of the past, with all its dark shadows and heavy regrets, seemed to be lifting. In its place, a hopeful, brighter future began to emerge, casting a warm light on their journey ahead. When they arrived home that evening, Lauren went straight to her room, exhausted but radiating happiness. Richard and Rose lingered in the living room, savoring the tranquility that followed a day so rich with laughter, connection, and love. Rose leaned into Richard, her voice soft yet filled with conviction. "I think today marked a turning point for us. We're finding our way back, reconnecting with what truly matters." Richard wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. His voice carried a steady resolve. "We are. And I won't let anything come between us now. We've endured too much to turn back." Rose gazed up at him, her eyes brimming with emotion. "You've given us so much, Richard. You've been the father Lauren needed, and you brought me hope when I thought it was lost." Richard pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. The trials they had faced, though difficult, had drawn them closer. Together they had forged a bond that was stronger than the pain they had endured. As they sat there in the quiet sanctuary of their home, it felt as if the world outside had faded into insignificance. Their struggles, while not entirely gone, no longer loomed as insurmountable obstacles. They were a family now, and they carried a deep, unshakable belief that no challenge was too great if they faced it together. Later, as the night deepened and they prepared for bed, Richard felt a sense of completeness he had never known. It was as if the fragmented pieces of his life had finally fallen into place. Together, they were crafting something beautiful and enduring. For the first time in what felt like forever, he genuinely believed they were going to be all right. They had braved the darkest of times and emerged stronger, ready to welcome the light of a new chapter. The fragile peace that Richard, Rose, and Lauren had worked so hard to establish was beginning to solidify, providing a steady foundation for their renewed lives. The echoes of joy from their recent trip still reverberated within their home, filling the space with laughter and love. It seemed at last that the worst was behind them. The ghosts of their past had finally been laid to rest, allowing them to move forward without fear. But just as they began to relax, feeling confident that they could leave the shadows behind, the past came crashing back into their lives. Its arrival was abrupt, a stark reminder that healing is never linear, and peace is often a fleeting gift that must be fiercely protected. It began with an unexpected phone call. Richard was seated at his desk, immersed in reviewing a stack of documents, when his phone buzzed. The number displayed was unfamiliar, but something about it compelled him to answer. As soon as he heard the voice on the other end, a cold knot of dread settled in his stomach. "Mr. Carl," the voice began, formal and direct. "This is Detective Daniel from the Washington, D.C. Police Department. We need to discuss a matter concerning your family." Richard's grip on the phone tightened. "What's this about, Detective?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing unease. "It's about the man who appeared at your home a few weeks ago," Detective Daniel explained. "We've received new intelligence indicating he may be planning to return. We have reason to believe he poses a significant threat, and precautions must be taken." As the detective continued, Richard's mind raced. The man had been seen loitering near their building several times, observing, waiting. Though he hadn't made a move, his presence was unsettling. The restraining order remained in place, but Richard knew all too well that a piece of paper wouldn't stop someone intent on harm. "We'll assign an officer to monitor your residence," Daniel continued, his tone firm. "But I strongly advise finding a safer location for your family, at least temporarily." Anger flared within Richard, hot and sharp. They had worked tirelessly to rebuild their lives, to create a haven where Lauren could feel secure. Now, it seemed all their efforts were once again under threat. Beneath the frustration, though, lay a deeper, quieter emotion: fear. This time, the man might not stay in the shadows, he might act. "Thank you," Detective Richard replied, his voice clipped but resolute. "We'll take your advice." After ending the call, Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. His thoughts churned with urgency. He had to move swiftly to shield his family before the situation spiraled out of control. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his chest. He couldn't afford to falter. More than anything, he needed to speak with Rose. They had to determine their next steps together. Leaving work earlier than usual, Richard drove home, the city lights flickering past his window. Worry clouded his thoughts, but alongside it came a growing determination. Whatever lay ahead, he was prepared to face it for the sake of his family. When Richard stepped into the apartment, Rose immediately sensed that something was wrong. She sat at the kitchen table, a stack of papers spread out before her, but the moment she saw his face, she pushed everything aside. "Richard, what's happening?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Richard took a deep breath, trying to steady himself before speaking. He explained the situation as calmly as he could. "He's been seen near the building. The police believe he might try something. They've stationed an officer outside, but they think it's safer if we leave for a while." Rose's face went pale, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "Oh my God, Richard, what are we going to do? Lauren can't go through this again." "I know," Richard replied gently, gripping her hand firmly. "We'll figure it out. For now, we can stay at my dad's place. It's farther from the city and much safer. After our last visit, he offered it to us just in case. I didn't want to accept at the time, but now." Rose nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I hate this, Richard. I hate that we're always running, never able to settle down, never able to just live in peace." Richard pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if to shield her from the weight of their reality. "I hate it too, Rose," he said softly. "But we have to do what's best for Lauren. We need to keep her safe, no matter what." With that, they began preparing for the move. It wasn't the life they had envisioned, but it was the only way to protect what mattered most. The next hour passed in a blur of packing, the two of them working quickly and methodically to avoid alarming Lauren. They presented the trip as a spontaneous getaway to Grandpa Carl's, painting it as an adventure rather than an escape. Lauren, her spirits lifted by the prospect of a change in scenery, eagerly embraced the idea, her earlier worries momentarily forgotten. As they loaded the car, Richard paused to take one last look at the apartment building. It had been their sanctuary, a place they had worked hard to make their home. Now, it felt like a place they were being forced to abandon. The thought of leaving, even temporarily, weighed heavily on him. But deep down, he knew there was no other option. They had to move forward to protect the life they had fought so hard to rebuild. The drive to Mr. Carl's estate was steeped in silence, the tension palpable in the confined space of the car. Rose reached over, her hand finding Richard's. She gave him a reassuring squeeze and whispered, "We're going to be okay. We'll get through this." Richard glanced at her, his resolve hardening at her quiet strength. "We will," he said firmly. "We just need to stay strong for Lauren." When they arrived at the estate, Mr. Carl was already waiting for them. His serious demeanor reflected the gravity of the situation, and the extra security measures around the property spoke volumes about his determination to protect his family. As Richard pulled the car into the long driveway and up to the grand house, a wave of relief washed over him. The estate, sprawling and secure, offered something they hadn't felt in weeks, a chance to breathe. Lauren, full of curiosity and energy, bolted from the car as soon as they stopped. Her excitement at exploring the expansive gardens momentarily lifted the weight of recent events. Meanwhile, Richard and Rose focused on unloading the car, their movements purposeful but quiet, the heaviness of the situation still lingering. Mr. Carl approached them, his expression resolute yet kind. "Everything here is locked down," he said firmly. "You're safe. Stay as long as you need." Richard nodded, a surge of gratitude rising in his chest. "Thanks, Dad. I didn't think we'd need this, but I'm so relieved it's an option." Placing a reassuring hand on Richard's shoulder, Mr. Carl offered a rare moment of warmth. "We'll get through this, Richard, as a family." As they settled into the estate, the suffocating anxiety that had followed them began to ease. Though it wasn't perfect, a fragile sense of security started to take root. Lauren, in particular, embraced the change wholeheartedly, wandering the gardens with childlike wonder and poking her head into every corner of the sprawling house. For her, the move felt like an adventure, a welcome distraction from the fears she had carried. For Richard and Rose, however, the estate was not an escape but a temporary reprieve. Each evening, once Lauren had gone to bed, they found themselves in deep conversation, weighing their options for the future. They both knew that staying at the estate indefinitely wasn't sustainable. Yet the thought of returning to their apartment, with its haunting memories and lingering threats, was equally untenable. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon and cast the gardens in a soft, golden glow, Rose turned to Richard. Her thoughtful expression broke the quiet. "Do you think we should move? Maybe find somewhere new, somewhere he won't think to look for us." Richard leaned back in his chair, staring at the horizon as he considered her words. "It might be the right call," he admitted. "But I don't want to uproot Lauren again unless we have no other choice. She's been through so much already." Rose nodded, understanding his hesitation. "I know," she said softly. "But I don't want us living in fear either. She deserves to grow up without always looking over her shoulder. We all do." Letting out a deep sigh, Richard ran a hand through his hair. "Maybe it is time," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their collective exhaustion. "A fresh start somewhere else, somewhere we can finally leave all this behind." Rose's eyes reflected a growing determination. "Then that's what we'll do," she said, her tone resolute. "We'll find a new place and start over, together." As they sat on the terrace, the sky shifting from the warm hues of sunset to the deep blue of night, a sense of clarity settled over Richard. He looked over at Rose, her silhouette outlined by the fading light, and felt a renewed resolve. They had faced so many challenges, and each time they had come out stronger. This was just one more hurdle to clear. "We'll get through this," Richard said with quiet conviction. "And when we do, we'll build something even better. A new home, a new life, a place where we can finally feel at peace." Rose smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I know we will," she whispered. Her voice, though soft, carried a deep assurance. In that shared moment, as they gazed out over the gardens, they both knew they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Whatever the future held, they would find a way to create something beautiful, something lasting, for themselves and for Lauren. "We've come too far," Richard said firmly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We can't let anything tear us apart now." As the evening deepened, the stars began to appear, their faint light dotting the dark sky. Richard felt a sense of peace slowly settle over him. The challenges of the past had risen to test them once again, but they were no longer the same people who had faced those trials before. They were stronger now, more connected. Together, they could handle whatever obstacles lay ahead. This wasn't the first time they had weathered hard times, and each time they had found their way back to a better place. Richard was certain this time would be no different. With a renewed sense of confidence, he felt ready to embrace the changes ahead, knowing they would face them side by side by side. Deciding to move was the first step toward opening a new chapter in their lives. After weeks of searching, Richard and Rose finally found a house in a quiet, welcoming neighborhood just outside Washington, D.C. It was a peaceful haven far removed from the memories and dangers that had lingered in their previous home. The house, a charming two-story structure with a spacious yard and tall, graceful trees, offered privacy and a sense of tranquility. From the moment they walked through its doors, both Richard and Rose felt certain it was the place where they could build the life they had been fighting so hard to protect. The process of moving was bittersweet. Packing up the apartment that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their lives wasn't easy. Each box carried with it memories of love, growth, and resilience. Yet they knew it was necessary. It was time to leave behind the shadows of the past and focus on creating something new. Lauren, ever adaptable and optimistic, greeted the change with excitement. She couldn't wait to explore her new bedroom, choose paint colors, and make the space uniquely hers. Her enthusiasm brought a lightness to the process that helped Richard and Rose push through the bittersweet task of saying goodbye. On the day of the move, Richard found himself standing alone in the empty apartment, letting the memories flood over him. This had been the place where he first brought Lauren when she had been lost and afraid. It was here that their journey as a family truly began. This apartment had witnessed Richard's transformation into a father, protector, and nurturer, and had been the foundation where he and Rose worked to rebuild their relationship from the ground up. Yet even with the weight of those memories, Richard knew it was time to move forward. This space, though significant, was a part of their past. Their future awaited them elsewhere. "We're ready," Rose said softly, joining him in the quiet room. She slipped her hand into his, her touch warm and steady. Her eyes held a mix of gratitude and hope as she squeezed his hand gently. "It's time for a new beginning," she added. Richard looked at her and nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions. "You're right. This is what's best for all of us." With that, they closed the apartment door for the final time. The familiar click of the lock seemed to echo with finality, yet it felt more like a door to the past closing than a loss. They walked to their car together, their hearts lightened by the anticipation of what lay ahead. The drive to their new home was filled with quiet excitement. The closer they got, the more it felt as if the weight of the past was lifting, giving way to the possibilities of the future. Lauren sat in the back seat, her excitement palpable as she chatted about all the ways she would decorate her new room. Rose turned in her seat to listen, her laughter mingling with Lauren's as Richard occasionally glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his heart full. As they pulled into the driveway of their new house, the tension of the past weeks seemed to dissipate completely. The home stood there, bathed in the soft evening light, a symbol of their fresh start. This was where they would create new memories, where they could feel safe, and where their family could grow stronger together. Richard parked the car and turned to Rose and Lauren, a small smile on his face. "Let's go see what our new home has in store for us," he said. And with that, they stepped out of the car, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives together. When they arrived at the new house, Lauren could hardly contain her excitement. She darted ahead, her laughter echoing through the empty rooms as she explored every corner of their new home. "This is going to be amazing, Dad," she called out, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "I can't wait to start decorating my room." Richard stood in the doorway, watching his daughter with a smile that grew wider with every joyful shout. His heart felt lighter than it had in months. "We'll make it exactly how you want," Lauren, he assured her. "This is your room, your home." Over the next few days, life became a blur of unpacking boxes, organizing belongings, and settling into their new surroundings. Richard and Rose worked together seamlessly, transforming the house from an empty shell into a warm, inviting home. They painted walls with soft, comforting colors, hung cherished family pictures, and carefully arranged furniture until every space felt just right. Slowly but surely, the house began to take on a life of its own, a sanctuary where they could finally relax and find peace. One evening, after a particularly long day of unpacking, they decided it was time for a break. They piled onto the couch for a family movie night, a soft blanket draped across them as they huddled together. Lauren nestled between Richard and Rose, her small frame a comforting presence. The movie flickered on the screen, but Richard found his attention drawn more to the quiet warmth of his family than to the story playing out before them. In that moment, he felt a profound sense of belonging. This closeness, this love was what he had dreamed of for so long. The weight of the past seemed to fade away, replaced by the gentle hum of peace and the joy of being together. As the credits rolled, Lauren's eyes fluttered shut. She leaned against Richard, her breathing slow and even, her face relaxed in peaceful sleep. He gazed down at her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His heart swelled with pride and love, marveling at how much she had grown and how far their little family had come. "She's so happy here," Rose murmured, breaking the comfortable silence. Her voice was soft, filled with emotion. Richard nodded, his gaze fixed on Lauren's sleeping face. "So are we," he replied. "We've been through so much, but we're stronger now because of it." Rose rested her head on his shoulder, letting out a contented sigh. "We've found our place, Richard, our home," she said, her words carrying a quiet certainty that resonated deeply with him. The next morning they woke to the gentle sound of birdsong outside their window. The golden light of the morning sun bathed their home in warmth, filling every corner with a sense of possibility. It was one of those rare mornings that felt full of promise, as if the universe itself was offering them a fresh start. As Richard stood at the kitchen window, sipping his coffee, he looked out at the backyard where Lauren was already running through the grass, her laughter carried on the breeze. Rose joined him, slipping her hand into his as they watched their daughter play. In that quiet moment, they knew they had made it through the storm. Together, they had built something beautiful, a place of safety, love, and endless potential. They spent the day outdoors, soaking in the charm of their new neighborhood. They greeted their neighbors, exchanging warm smiles and introductions, and discovered the nearby park where Lauren would undoubtedly spend countless afternoons playing. The community exuded a sense of warmth and belonging, exactly the haven they had envisioned, a place where Lauren could grow up surrounded by love, security, and support. As the sun began to sink beneath the horizon, casting the sky in soft hues of pink and amber, the family made their way back home. The day had been long but fulfilling, leaving them happily exhausted. They decided to enjoy dinner on the back porch, relishing the cool evening breeze. Richard stood by the grill, expertly flipping burgers as the tantalizing aroma filled the air, while Rose busied herself setting the table with care. Meanwhile, Lauren darted around the yard, her laughter ringing out as she played with a ball she had found in the garage. When they finally gathered around the table, their conversation flowed effortlessly. The atmosphere was filled with joy and laughter as they shared stories and highlights of their day. For Richard, it was these simple, unremarkable moments that brought him the greatest happiness. They were a testament to how far they had come in the brighter days that lay ahead. After dinner, the family lingered on the porch, gazing up at the stars as they began to sprinkle the darkening sky. Lauren nestled into Rose's lap, her small body fighting the pull of sleep. Yet she was determined to stay awake just a little longer. "Can we do this every night?" Lauren asked softly, her voice tinged with drowsiness. Richard reached out, gently running his fingers through her hair. A tender smile spread across his face. "We can do this anytime you want, Lauren," he said, his tone steady with love. "This is our home now, and we can make as many traditions as we like." Lauren nodded, her eyelids growing heavier with each passing moment. She snuggled deeper into Rose's embrace, her words slurred with sleep. "I love it here," she murmured. "I love you, Dad." "I love you, Mom." Rose's eyes glistened with unshed tears, while Richard felt an unexpected lump rise in his throat. The weight of the moment, so pure and hard-earned, settled deeply in his heart. This was what they had fought so hard for: a sanctuary, a family, a place to belong. "We love you too, sweetheart," Richard whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you can imagine." As Lauren's soft breathing signaled her surrender to sleep, Richard and Rose remained seated together under the stars. The quiet enveloped them like a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. Holding each other close, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. They had weathered storms that could have torn them apart, but instead, those hardships had forged a bond that was unbreakable. In this newfound calm, they realized they had finally discovered their home, a sanctuary built on love, resilience, and hope. As they looked up at the stars above, a shared determination filled their hearts. They had everything they needed to build a future filled with laughter, love, and unshakable family ties. This was their fresh beginning, and together, they were ready to embrace it with open arms. In this heartfelt story of hope and redemption, Richard, Rose, and Lauren show us the true meaning of family. Through trials and uncertainty, their unwavering love and determination brought them to a place of peace and belonging. From rebuilding trust to creating a new home filled with warmth and laughter, they proved that even the darkest moments can lead to brighter days. This isn't just a story about facing challenges, it's about triumphing over them together. It reminds us all of the power of unity, the strength in forgiveness, and the beauty of starting over. Richard's courage to protect his family, Rose's unshakable support, and Lauren's joyful resilience create a portrait of a family who refused to let fear define their future. We hope this story touched your heart as much as it inspired us to share it. If it resonated with you, we invite you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of love and perseverance. Every interaction helps us bring more meaningful stories like this to life. But most importantly, we want to hear from you. What part of their journey spoke to you the most? Did it remind you of your own family or inspire you in some way? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights and experiences could inspire someone else who needs encouragement today. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Together, let's celebrate the beauty of resilience, the strength of love, and the joy of finding a place to call home.